and welcome back to season 3 of my multidimensional online show. And this time we're talking all about love and partnership and how to flourish in our relationships while going through the ascension process. So I myself had the experience whilst going through what I've come to realize was the soul merge process. And then after that, the first stages of the higher bodies integration, of really experiencing a dramatic shift in the way that I viewed partnership and sex. And my needs changed, I discovered, almost overnight from what I would say was previously very much a lower body egoic perspective on both topics to a higher, more sacred, you could say, or divine perspective. And that shift, of course it was huge, and it created a massive change in my relationship and in my relationships with other people, in terms of how I now functioned in relationships and, who we now were, myself and my partner, Ethan, who we now were to each other. So we kind of got to re-explore all of that. And I know that I'm not the only one who goes through these types of transitions. So many of you, the viewers, have got similar stories, or perhaps you're confused as to how to be in sacred union after going through your ascension process, or how your sexuality now functions. Perhaps you are also, looking for answers on how to manifest the type of love that you're now looking for. So we're going to be talking about that and more, just see what comes through organically in today's interview, where I'm delighted to be joined by one of my favourite teachers, my favourite mystics and poets. So many of you will know Richard Rudd, who's the creator of the Gene Keys. And if you don't know him, I highly recommend that you check out his work. And my story, in terms of how I first discovered Richard and the Gene Keys, was really when I was living in my caravan in Glastonbury for 2.5 years, while I was going through this very large midlife transition, you could call it, having sort of previously left my very well-paid career in corporate to follow this higher calling. And as soon as I started reading Richard's is now very well-known book, it's called Gene Keys: Unlocking the Higher Purpose Hidden in Your DNA. I literally experienced this like full body cellular activation or response to reading his book. So like energy rushes going all the way up and down me. And I spent a very happy sort of 6 to 9 months afterwards, really just immersing myself in his incredible work, studying my profile, because you can actually look up your profile and really get, much more of an understanding about how you are uniquely designed. And really, I used it as a precious tool, and I still do today, to navigate my way through life and to become a lot more conscious about how to unlock love and healing for myself and within my relationships. So it is with a grateful heart that I welcome back Richard onto the show to talk all about love and sacred union this time. So Richard, a very, very warm welcome to the show.
Thanks, Aria. It's lovely to be here, and one of my favorite subjects. So very happy about that.
Yeah, so let's get straight into it. So can we start here? What do you believe the function of our relationships is when it comes to spiritual evolution or ascension?
It's a good question. I mean, for me, the purpose really of relationships is to enhance our own higher purpose in life. So that's, they are one of the core drivers, if not the core driver, of the spiritual path itself. So having said that, there's not a lot of teaching out there on relationships in terms of spirituality. The Buddhists don't really know much about it. Sorry, Buddhists, but that's not part of that, because it's a kind of, that is not what the Buddha taught.
Mhm.
You know, he wasn't in a relationship, you know, with a woman or a man or anything like that. So, you know, and when you look into a lot of these mystical traditions, there's not a lot of guidance around relationships and sacred relationships and the purpose of relationships. So, you know, there are occasional references to it, but it's left to like pioneers of the kind of so-called New Age to discover this, and that's been like one of my core journeys personally, is to really learn about the spiritual path through the lens of relationships, you know, and particularly intimate relationships. So yeah, it's like it's the edge, it's the absolute edge of spirituality. You know, I'm very happy to kind of be standing and working at that edge.
Mhm. Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah, it's absolutely true. We haven't heard a lot about it from these incredible spiritual teachers. So you've spoken about purpose, relationships being a key to kind of help us to unlock our higher purpose. Do you also think that the relationship vehicle in itself can be an accelerator in terms of our, like, you know, the spiritual ascension process that you described so well in your book, Gene Key number 22, I know it well, you know, in terms of the merging with the higher bodies?
Absolutely, because relationships reflect us back into the depth of, and I know this sounds like intense, the depth of our own suffering and wounding.
Mm.
That's what they show us. I mean, they show us our love. They show us our relationship to love. And so when you fall in love with someone, you know, and most people have had that experience, what's actually happening is you're falling in love with the purity of your own heart. You know, that's what you see in the other. You see the purity of your own heart and you fall in love with that. And then, of course, that person is not able usually to kind of maintain that projection, that image. And so you know, then the relationship changes, you know, in some cases it collapses. Um, so at some point we have to kind of understand that we are projecting that purity onto another, and and we can go on projecting that purity onto another, but then we have to be realistic as well and forgiving and all those things. And we have to realize that if that person is doing something that doesn't please us or that closes our heart or that, you know, all those sort of things, then actually it's our heart's own purity that's being reflected, not only the other person. And that's the great teaching of
Mm.
relationships. It's constantly teaching us about love and about our own ability to love or inability to love. And at the core of my own understanding and journey with love through the Gene Keys is this, what I've learned is it's all about the, how shall I put it? Well, learning how to return what I call how to return non-love with love. And that is the greatest art that I think relationships teach us, to
Mhm.
return non-love with love.
Mm.
So yeah, that's the very essence for me.
That's deep, and you know, that's a challenge
Yeah.
for us all.
Sounds good, doesn't it? That's like, but the application of that is like,
Yeah,
wow, challenge.
yeah, because you're right. I mean, it just presses our relationships, press on those most sensitive, vulnerable, raw parts of ourselves, which can often evoke reactions. And I know you have, well, I know because I love your work. You have some great teachings around this, and some really sage advice as to, and I would love to hear it again, actually, from you, like your mouth. You know, I've read your words, but like, how can we stop ourselves going into this place of oversensitivity reaction?
Well, that's the question. I'm not sure we can. What we can do, of course we can, but through awareness. And you know, it's a process, it's a journey. You know, I have been in my primary relationship for 20 years. this year. And any relationship that you stay in, that you work at, that you're prepared to really dig deeply, will offer you these rewards, over a period of time. And I have quite a strong agenda. I'm very open about my agenda. My agenda is to try and keep people together. And so I really encourage people to stay together unless they are really in a difficult, unless there's really abuse going on of some form.
Yeah.
Because it's when you push through those difficulties and barriers that the rewards come. So yeah, we have to learn humility, and we have to learn self-responsibility, and we have to be truly we have to really learn from our mistakes over and over and over again, and we are human, and I've made so many mistakes through my relationships, and said things or done things that have hurt my loved ones, and we all know that, and so we have to learn to forgive ourselves, and then go, well, I'm going to try harder next time, and slowly, as that awareness kind of grows in us that we can forgive ourselves for our mistakes, and then we begin to heal our heart. And also, obviously, that often involves for people forgiving others as well for their mistakes, because they're the reflection of us. They're the reflection of our heart. So if our heart can't forgive another yet, that's absolutely, we have to allow ourselves everything. If your heart can't forgive someone for something they've done to you, then you have to really kind of be with that feeling. You can't sort of put yourself under pressure, like, I have to forgive. You can't force these things. You cannot force the heart to open. It's the one thing you can't do. So what we learn through life, and what I've learned and encapsulated, I hope, in Gene Key's teachings, is that the heart opens in layers. And so layer by layer by layer, and it also only opens according to how it's treated. So it has to be treated with gentleness, and gentleness and patience. So that's what we have to apply to ourselves as well as others. So if you can't forgive someone yet, then you have to be very patient and gentle with your own heart, and just go, I understand. It's like you're fathering yourself or mothering yourself, and you're just going, I understand. I really understand. That hurt. And so how can I move on from this? And it has its journey, it has its timing. We can't push the timing, we can't force the timing. We have to be, we learn compassion towards ourselves and others, and that's the whole journey of relationships. And that's why it's teaching us this path of tantra. That's what true tantra is. True tantra is the path of opening the heart, and forgiving, and it's a long, sometimes arduous journey, but also it is the as you asked, I think it's the fast track to enlightenment. I think it's the hard but fast track, relationships, because we have to learn authenticity, and we have to learn these lessons, and we learn them so quickly, and we learn them on a daily basis. And so the path of love is like, it is the ultimate path.
Yeah. I'm just sort of thinking that the viewers would have seen this when I did my video for the page that people sort of opted into this summit. I freely shared that there are times in and you can probably relate to this, Richard, as can like a load of our viewers, there are times in my relationship where I think, wouldn't this spiritual ascension evolution malarkey be better single or be done with me up a mountain somewhere, because it's like, it's intense. And you're right, like the spiritual teachers, that we, Buddha, Yeshua, these incredible avatars don't really, they didn't have the sort of day-to-day challenges necessarily that one has with a wife, husband, kids, PTA, in-laws.
It's true. It's true. We are dealing with a very modern, spiritual path. It's wonderful because there is this edge. And if you find a spiritual teacher out there who is in a kind of relationship and they are learning from it and teaching it, then you really are, that's someone worth listening to, because you're going to hear from someone that's just like you, that's just experiencing the same things as you, and perhaps they've learned a bit quicker, perhaps they're further along the path than you, and that would be great, if there are people like that out there, and there are some. And I think, I just find it rich. It's a rich path, the path of love, path of devotion to another.
You've mentioned forgiveness a few times. Could we just explore that concept a little bit more, and perhaps hear from you why forgiveness is so important on the path of love? We hear it spoken about a lot, and I love that you talked about being patient with ourselves with that. But why is forgiveness important?
I think it has to do a lot with karma, forgiveness, because we come into these bodies, we live these dramas, things occur around us and to us, and then we have to deal with those things, emotionally, mentally, physically. Sometimes, there are traumas lodged deeply in our body, and particularly if, it's interesting because it all gets laid down in our childhood. The patterns of our wounding actually get laid down. There's a lot of evidence now, hard evidence, that they actually get laid down when we're in the womb.
Yeah.
That actually many kind of the imprints of trauma are laid down in the womb, and then they kind of appear later, right? And those traumas are like, think about that. When we're in the womb, we are absolutely transparent. We are literally taking in the kind of quantum field of the planet. So everything that the mother takes in, everything the mother hears, it goes in through her emotional body. She responds to it through her mind. Everything, it's all saturating the fetus. The frequency of everything that she hears, whether it's listening to the news or whether it's listening to someone shout at her or her shouting back at someone else or whatever it is, somewhere out in the world, there's some suffering and it's passing through the child.
Mm-hmm.
So in a way, you can't avoid the trauma in some way. And it's lodged in the physical body, in the cells of the body, in the memory of the cells of the body. That's the first thing I think it's really important for us to understand. It trauma is in the physical body, and that means that we actually can't reach it. You can't get to the very core of your suffering only through psychotherapy, for example. Because that's a mental way in that will take you then hopefully into an emotional patterning, but then how to move that into the physical, the physical body, the cells of the body, to release trauma from the physical body is really takes a lot. It takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of process, it takes a lot of self-compassion, and forgiveness is always a part of that story. It's always a part of the story. I don't think there's any relationship that comes together that doesn't have to in some way deal with forgiveness. So it is, it always comes back to forgiveness of oneself, though. Always, even if you're forgiving another, it's ultimately because you've let go of the pattern inside yourself. You've just let it go, and you let go of it mentally, then emotionally, and then physically. And those are the layers. First of all, you have to understand the pattern. You have to understand that you inherited that kind of pattern and it wasn't your fault, even though it feels like that, or it wasn't the other person's fault. It came through their upbringing, it came through their imprinting, it came through their parenting or yours. And so once you understand that, you realize, it's just a child in each one of us. There's just, it was the child in that other person that did that to me. It was just a lost child, that developed that pattern from its father or mother, that, whatever it is. Once you understand that, you can let it go psychologically. You can understand, you can look at someone really quite unpleasant, let's say Hitler, for example, and then you understand like the little boy inside that man, and you go, well, what happened to that little boy? And if you were to understand psychologically what happened to that little boy, you would immediately forgive at a mental level. You go, I understand. What he had no choice, right? If you could see the little boy. And then the next layer is the emotional layer, when it comes into the feelings, and then you feel the suffering of the other person, because it's something we all share. We all share different kind of suffering, but the pattern's just slightly different with each person. Whether however whatever the pattern is, it might be betrayal that's being played out. It might be guilt. It might be shame. It might be, denial, aggression, all kinds of things, that it can be that can manifest in relationships, difficult patterns. But they're all rooted in the same core kind of grain of suffering. That is the human suffering. We all have that. It's where we all connect. It's where we can all empathize. So emotionally, you then have to go through the process of feeling the emotions, your own emotions, the other's emotions. You have to learn empathy. And once you learn empathy, which is to kind of feel what it's like to be inside another, then you can begin to let go of the emotional pattern. Then you can begin to forgive. And then once you've got through that layer, it becomes the physical, and then it's beyond your kind of, it's out of your hands then, because the physical body lets go when it lets go. It lets go when the heart opens, and when the heart opens, then the physical body suddenly just releases the trauma. So usually as tears, it can be as sweat, it can be as shaking, it can be all kinds of ways. It doesn't have to be a dramatic thing. It can be very subtle. It can be through illness, that the body lets go. And so there's all kinds of ways in which the body can release, these ancient traumas. And of course, I'm sorry I'm going on, but like the trauma doesn't, at a certain level, the trauma is not even personal. It's also ancestral.
Yes.
It's held in the DNA. And my work called the Venus sequence is all about this. It's all about coming to find these trauma patterns inside ourselves, inside our DNA, and then going through a process of releasing, understanding, and then releasing them, and using our relationships as the means of doing that. And what the result of that is our hearts gradually learn to open more and more and more and more and more consistently. Yeah.
Incredible answer. Thank you so much for that.
Sorry, long answer, but yeah.
Deep. And I love
subject.
that. I mean, we could go deeper, because I'm still on the sort of question, do I forgive Hitler? Right? I mean, that's still a question which is buzzing around my consciousness and probably a lot of our viewers. But yeah, I mean, forgiveness is just such a deep topic, and I'm certainly grateful for teachers like yourself and other brave souls. I remember this incredible lady standing up in a stage in front of a huge audience, and her father had been blown up in a terrorist attack, effectively. And this took them years to get to this point, but came onto the stage the terrorist, who had served a prison sentence, and these two souls had actually found their way back together, and she had forgiven him, and she was talking about the process that she went through. And I find it very inspiring because, like a lot of us, forgiveness can be a challenge. And as a mental concept, it can be okay to say things like, oh yeah, I forgive this, and I know there's a little boy or a little girl in there. But, if it happens to a member of your family, how do you get to that deeper level of forgiveness? And that must be just, a huge rite of passage for people.
Absolutely. Vast. Yeah. And yeah, some of us have to deal with those very, very deep karmic patterns, and
Yeah.
some of us aren't able to forgive, and that's also a forgivable thing, you
Yeah.
know. Like, if you can't forgive, that you have to forgive yourself that.
Hmm.
Do you know what I mean? There's so many layers. You just go, well, I can't, you know, not in this life.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, can we just sort of like a little interlude, almost just ground the viewers a little bit into your work? Because you know, a lot of people watching know you, know your work, but some don't. And you're an incredible teacher for all of the things that we're talking about in this summit, which is about love, but it's also about ascension. It's also about evolution. So can we just talk a little bit about that?
Sure.
Yeah, thank
Where
you.
do you want to go?
So yeah, I mean, just tell us, how did you, you know, the Gene Keys, what is it and how did it come about?
Yeah. Well, that's a big question, but it's a methodology for healing your heart, and you know, essentially, it's a grand synthesis of many sort of insights, spiritual, psychological, social, you know, at all levels, that kind of helps you to understand life and yourself in the fabric of life, and of course, it has you know, one of the aspects to it that make it a spiritual teaching, that make it different from a psychological teaching, is that it has these higher dimensional understandings, which is probably why you've invited me here, because um, you know, that with along with the transmission of the Gene Keys comes this teaching of the subtle bodies, you know, this teaching of bodies that lie beyond our kind of normal psychological emotional understanding, you know, so these higher vehicles of which we're part, you know, part of us. And and Gene Keys has very specific kind of understandings around how those higher vehicles operate inside us, and how our life is essentially, and evolution, human evolution, spiritual evolution is moving towards these higher dimensions, and those dimensions are are kind of coming down into us, and our job is to ground them, you know. So these higher bodies that people call things like, you know, some of the words I have in Gene Keys are the causal body, the Buddhic body, these kind of higher levels of frequency of our DNA operate, you know, that some of us may have had experiences of those bodies, maybe, you know, like the one you had and I've had at times, where ecstasy just kind of comes down into us, or, you know, we're swollen with something, you know, some incredible energy. But then how do we ground that into our everyday life? And that's what Gene Keys is really all about: how to bring that, how to create an environment, or how shall I say it, how to create the conditions for those higher vehicles to be able to come down and then integrate them into a modern everyday life. That is the great challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, relationships are a real part of that. So, you know, that's what this summit's all about, right? How do you integrate those higher dimensions into an everyday life with everyday people? You know,
Mm-hmm.
so
Yeah.
like for many of us, like my relationship's a classic example in a way. Like I'm a very sort of spiritual man with deep spiritual understandings of the higher planes. My wife is very grounded, and it isn't like that. She's a spiritual woman, but in her own earthy way.
Mm-hmm.
So our worldviews are actually very different mentally,
Mm-hmm.
but our souls have a deep connection, a deep love. And that's the case for many people who, you know, often you fall in, like, you know, a person who's had these higher things then finds himself in a family with people who don't understand it at all,
Yeah.
or, you know, or with kids that rebel against it, or with a partner that they fall in love with but isn't really that interested, you know, or doesn't get it
Yeah.
at all. And so that's where we have to integrate and learn to integrate. And that is the challenge I absolutely love. And I've had to grapple with a lot. And I feel like I've made some progress over 20 years, and longer, in terms of, you know, it's all about just being ordinary at the same time as being extraordinary. And
Mhm.
I was sharing this with a friend recently, who was asking for advice, like how to integrate those higher frequencies. And my advice to him was, don't try and be special.
Mhm.
Just be content with being ordinary in someone else's eyes. That, like, your higher frequencies are for you. They're for yourself. They're not necessarily for sharing with everyone in front of you. There are people that just can't. It makes them so uncomfortable that they can't. They don't know where to go. They don't know what. They don't know. They can't be with you.
Yeah.
And so, for us, it's like Jesus, right? There's stories of by some of the, I can't remember who it was. I think it was one of the great Christian kind of mystical writers. I'm trying to remember his name. Might come back to me. He talked about Jesus's aura and how Christ had the capacity to kind of expand or contract his spiritual aura.
Mhm.
Okay, and that most of the time he had it on contract because it was too powerful for just sort of ordinary people to be around. So he contracted it for them so that he could be with them and among them. And
Mhm.
it's not something that he did consciously. It probably just happens.
Mhm.
So it's not that you're hiding your light under. It's not that you're hiding. You're just being with people.
Mhm.
And it's like me and my father in a way. It's like my father kind of, occasionally would, like, when I wrote the Gene Keys book, I'd hand him this book and he'd read like the first few pages and just go, I don't understand any of that. And for a while in my life, I tried to kind of help him understand, and then eventually I just let go. And I had this one day where I was walking around the garden with him. He's in his 90s now, and he loves gardening. And he was just talking to me about all the Latin names of all the plants and flowers in there. And I realized that was his language, and so I came to his language. And the moment I let go of needing him or wanting him to kind of understand me at my level,
Mhm.
we relaxed together,
Mhm.
and then he could understand me at his level,
Mhm.
and then the love flowed between us. But
Mhm.
and I had no more needs of him to be any other way. And I
Yeah.
think that's a lesson for all of us.
Yeah.
Like, let people be at the level they're on. And don't put them under pressure to have to evolve at the same speed as you're evolving.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's a big one for people in spiritual relationships.
Yes.
You
Yeah.
know,
Absolutely. Yeah. And an
I went
important.
off on a bit of a tangent there, didn't I? But that's all right.
It's great. We went into the Gene Keys, and then we went into like a living embodiment of you living
Yeah,
the Gene Keys, which is beautiful.
yeah,
Yeah, meeting people at their level. And I think, the great thing is that, this platform's one of them. There are many in the world. We have now got places where we can, like, get together like-minded kind of,
exactly.
we want to go really sort of multi-dimensional and high frequency, then we can still get that, like,
Mm,
it's an itch you've got to scratch sometimes,
exactly.
but
But you don't want to put that pressure on your partner.
we don't need to do it
That's
in
a
our
horrible
families.
pressure to put on someone.
Yeah, it's so true. Yeah, with your family. And I've had a similar experience with my father as well. We didn't speak for 18 months when I was sort of going through my big transition. And, now we do talk again. And, I do try and sort of meet him on his level. I have to say, there's still a part of me that's like, I'm not just going to completely talk about physical things all the time, Dad. I'm going to talk to you about this being that appeared to me in my bedroom last night as well, just to sort of even, we're still exploring, and we get
Yeah,
to sort of, have fun as we're doing
yeah.
that as well.
I
But
mean,
yeah,
I people are sometimes amazed to hear that, because I'm a spiritual teacher. I write all these spiritual things and inspirations, and quite a lot of my friends are sort of, they don't even know what I really do. Um, and I keep them close friends. These are,
Wow.
and I'm not in the least bit bothered by that, actually. And I can just be in the pub with them and just be an ordinary human being with them, and that it's that love, it's the love that matters. It
Yes.
doesn't matter what form it takes. It's that you can just laugh with them, you can listen to their problems, their dilemmas, you can, and then if they want to know more, they'll ask you more. But I don't, it's like we have to be ordinary,
We do. Absolutely. And I think you're a very grounded spiritual teacher, and your work is very grounding. And it was certainly, when I kind of shot out my body and was living in the caravan, being very on ground, your work was a grounding influence. And like many of us who have had these heightened experiences, sometimes we can like detach from society and want to be separate. And for a period of time, perhaps we need to be. That was my experience. I was super sensitive. I only had to think about the tour and my energy was there whilst I was sitting in my caravan. It was a very strange experience for me for quite a while. But your work is very grounding, and we need that. We absolutely need that in and the values that you bring forth, the sort of societal values and the personal values that you share. I think that for me has been one of the things that I've noticed about you and your work the most. It's the higher spiritual values that you share and you help to ground into society.
Yeah, and that's where it happens. It happens in our relationships. You've got to learn to return non-love with love on a daily basis. And then the better you get at doing that, in your kind of close relationships, the better you get at doing it generally. So you can look at the news and you can see Donald Trump or whoever it is, and you can kind of feel the little boy there, and you can just go, well, it's part of the drama of the world. Everyone's got the same wound, it's just manifest in a different way. And you feel a slight kind of lightening of your heart, that you don't need to worry so much about everything,
Yeah.
And yes, that you can still acknowledge the terrible suffering that many people feel, or that most people feel and are going through. And yet there's a kind of lightening of it at some level inside us. So you don't, you're not, I was thinking just recently, like how when we're in these bodies, we are so submerged in time. We're submerged in the mud of time. It's like this thing that's just holds us. And when you're free from these bodies, you're in timelessness, and so time is eternal. And then you can travel backwards and forwards in time. But then when you're in the body, you're like in this kind of particular life, and and time moves at a certain speed in a certain way, and you kind of are held by its laws, and its rhythms. And that's an extraordinary thing. So once you kind of release yourself into the timeless, and then you come back into time, you can bring that perspective, and you can go, oh, it's all a bit of a joke.
Yes.
Actually, it's all a little bit of a joke, really, and that lightness is very important to bring into the kind of heaviness of relationships.
Yes.
Because they can get very heavy. So, but I don't mean like saying to other people, oh, lighten up necessarily. I mean, lighten up yourself, so that you can kind of be there for another suffering. Because if you can really hold that space of the timeless, then you can really be compassionate with another person. And in a way, that's something we really learn from love, is to listen to another, to listen deeply into their heart. And another really good thing for people listening to this is that we don't have to fix people.
Yeah.
People don't necessarily need fixing. They just need to be heard. A heart doesn't need you to leap in and try and make it feel better. It needs to be listened to. That's the ultimate healing. And it may be that out of that listening comes an offering that you say, I might be able, I'd like to help you with that if you're open to it. maybe they're not. Maybe it's enough just to be a presence, so that, but without putting them under pressure. It's like, it's all about not putting people under pressure. And we're very quick with our many skills to leap in and go, oh, I can help you make you feel better. And maybe that's not what they need.
Yeah.
They just want to be allowed to feel what they feel and to go deeper into it.
And be held.
Not to be made to feel better. Because in feeling it more deeply, ultimately they will move through it. It will begin to shift. Yeah. So important one, that.
It's such an important point. And I'm just sort of like inwardly chuckling because, of course, we don't always allow that space because we ourselves don't want to feel the feelings that somebody else is feeling.
So true.
It's like, let's fix and let's not have to feel.
Yeah.
You've also got some other, we were chatting before the interview, and something that came up just in the pre-conversation, a really important teaching around, like not rushing doing the inner heart work. So, we're talking about the Venus sequence, which is one of your incredible programs. I'll let you talk about it more than me, but it basically, looks at the heart, looks at healing the heart, looks at relationships. And you were saying, it's important to have a foundation before we do that. Can you talk into that a bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is part of the core teachings of Gene Keys, which is called the Golden Path. And there's a program you can take called the Golden Path, and it has 3 phases to it. And the first phase is about purpose. So it's engaging this part of us that can tune in to our core purpose in the physical body, right? So our core purpose is not necessarily what we're here to do. It's an essence that we're here to bring to the things that we do. It's a sense of being, a sense of beingness. And once you can attain that core stability, because once you've got that beingness and and you can resonate that kind of higher virtue, whatever it is, and the Gene Keys gives you a language for that, because it will give you a specific word. For example, like my core purpose happens to be timelessness, which is something you access through patience, the gift of patience. And so my journey into purpose is about overcoming impatience, settling into deep patience, and then finally expanding into timelessness, right? So that's a very specific journey for me through that Gene Key. And there are 64 of these Gene Keys. So as you know, you'll be given one that gives you a kind of focus in that area. And the Golden Path allows you to contemplate these different Gene Keys in a sequence. And as you unlock one after the other, you unlock these kind of paradigms and patterns, and you open up things inside you in a pathway. The whole thing I've learned is why they're called Gene Keys, is that we unlock things in sequences, because the genes are unlocked and unzipped in sequences. Everything is about sequences when it comes to DNA. So our healing also operates in a sequence. And this is again about time. Time and timing is all about sequences. So we heal through sequences. We heal gradually. We open gradually. And so the Golden Path offers you this pathway, these steps, one thing at a time. You start at the surface, and then you start to move deeper and deeper and deeper. And the first sequence, which I call activation, the activation sequence, kind of takes you through these core challenges in your life. So what's the core challenge of your life, right? And then as you open to that challenge, you create the grounds for a breakthrough. And that breakthrough enables you to feel this sense of presence, this sense of being that is your true purpose. And that's something you feel inside your being. And once you have that, once you kind of have a reference point for that, you can deepen that, and you can begin to relax physically, deep in your body. So the activation sequence, as a program, takes some time to really begin to come into it, and to feel that sense of being. And it's wonderful because you feel relaxed, and the breakthrough also can be quite dramatic, because in the breakthrough, you'll let go of stuff and probably come into a simpler kind of vision of your life. And once you've got that, then in a way you're ready to do phase 2, which is about love, because you can only really enter into a clean relationship, in a clear way, when you have this sense of grounding, when you have this sense of inner purpose. So because you then have the stability to be able to tackle the wound, and the wound that we each carry, I call it the sacred wound, because everyone has it. The wound is delicate work. It's very delicate work, and that's what's called the Venus sequence. That's the second phase of the Golden Path program. And again, that will take a long time for you to work through it. It's all a life's work, really. But
absolutely,
it's months just to begin to unravel your own Venus sequence. And what the Venus sequence shows us is it shows us the karmic patterns in our relationships. It shows us why we've drawn certain people towards us, and it reflects us specifically layers of wounding, in order that we can see them, understand them, let them go, and then in those, I call them shadows. Each gene key has a shadow. In that shadow is contained a gift. So once you can face and see that shadow, then you can begin to unlock its gift. And its gift, behind its gift, is actually a siddhi, and a siddhi is like a divine energy. So it's actually what Venus sequence shows us is that through love and through our relationships lies our eventual freedom, our spiritual freedom, our higher dimensional, life is actually hidden in our relationships. It's because there are sequences in which each person's heart is unique in its unfolding. So when you look at your Venus sequence, you're looking at a map of your wounding, but hidden in that wounding map is the treasure. It's a treasure map, so. And also the heart is like a kind of safe, like a safe. It has like you turn it one way and it clicks, you turn it another way and it clicks, you turn it another combination and then finally you open it. The heart is like that. It has layers of wounding. So you begin with the outer layer, which is mental. The outer layer is like, okay, I've got to understand it first. I've got to understand what is the mental pattern, my primary mental pattern that stops me from opening my heart, right? And that everyone has one, like a mental strategy, a way of thinking that kind of prevents us from being open, right? And once you can disable that, then you're into the next layer, which is the emotional wounding, and these are also all laid down in the 7-year cycles of our childhood. So the mental pattern is something we learned in our third 7-year cycle, which is as a teenager. The emotional pattern is something we learned in our second 7-year cycle, puberty, and that emotional pattern, again, it's unique for each person, but as you understand it through that gene key and its language, you'll begin to see, I always do that. And it disables you. I mean, it's uncomfortable in a way because you have to look at like, what's my defense pattern? And you have to do that for yourself and see it for yourself. And so it's very rich, powerful work, but as a mirror, so I'll give you an example. My defense pattern is one of it is guilt, right? So, I kind of can defend myself by transferring guilt, so I either transfer the guilt to someone else, or I take it upon myself. And both patterns, whichever way I do it, prevent me from feeling an uncomfortable feeling, right? So I have to really get into understand, well, what is that? How do I get past that pattern, and where does it come from? And that's a feeling journey, right? That's very alive in my relationships, and my wife will tell you. It's like, but I have to disable it. So I've learned over the years to kind of see that pattern, and then the awareness disables it before it can go. But then behind that pattern is something amazing. Mm-hmm. Behind that pattern is actually an expansion of love that is huge, and acceptance. And then the third layer, the deepest layer, is physical, as I mentioned this earlier. So it goes mental, emotional, and physical. And the physical is the deepest because as I said, it's in the DNA where the wound really lies deepest. In the first 7 years of our life, the DNA was encoded, you know, with a kind of a certain physical pattern. Doesn't matter, you know, it's like whatever it was that triggered it in your first 7 years is almost like secondary information. It had to be triggered by something that happened in the first 7 years when the child felt unsafe or felt cut off or felt, what depends what it is. You know, there are certain patterns, and each person has to look at, well, what's your pattern? You know, it might be that your pattern is anger, you know, and anger is a wonderful deflection, you know, from feeling something underneath the anger. What's underneath the anger? Because if you always go into the anger, you never have to feel the feeling underneath it, right? If you immediately go into aggressive. So you have to go, well, what's beneath it? So first thing you have to do is see the anger for what it is. And the awareness then digs into that anger. If it's anger, it can be fear, it can be repression, it can be all kinds of different things. But the Venus sequence shows you specifically, it gives you words. It goes, this is yours. And it gives you a description of that pattern. And then you can think about it and you can watch for it and you'll see it. And sometimes your partner will see it quicker than you. And anyway, so eventually you get to the physical, and the physical releases it over time. And this is all a journey of opening the heart, you know, so these layers of wounding that lie in us, you know, the Venus sequence helps you to kind of go deeper into that territory. And then, as I said, also behind those wounds are siddhis. Siddhi is a Sanskrit word meaning divine manifestation, or in a way, superpower. You know, so a siddhi is something like, one of mine is intoxication, you know, and so, you know, once the heart, you know, if I can get underneath that pattern and really deep in there, then I get into this state of incredible intoxication, and then I can begin to radiate that out, and you know, and share it with others, or I can just enjoy it myself, you know, and just go into that
Divine
phase, that divine intoxication in which all thoughts cease, and you're just in this higher state of love, you know, that is just ecstatic. Anyway, those states are all layered inside us, but they're underneath these shadow patterns. So the gene keys is like really edgy in that sense. It you know, you have to be prepared. So this is a long answer. You have to be prepared. You have to do phase 1 before you can get to phase 2. And by the way, phase 3 is prosperity, you know, which I love. I've always loved that. Prosperity, true prosperity, comes only when the heart opens. You know, so you can't get to true prosperity through like making lots of money. You know, you can't. True prosperity is not making lots of money. It's true prosperity is of the whole being, to prosper in your relationships, to prosper at all levels, to prosper in your health, to be just radiant, you know. And that's the whole journey of, you know, that I've kind of laid out in this program. And the wonderful thing about it is that you can follow it yourself in your own home, in your own life. It's a sort of in a caravan, wherever you like. You kind of figure it out for yourself. I you know, I'm not that kind of teacher that's out there teaching it all the time. I've just laid it all out, and I become your friend in that process through the videos and the audios and stuff and the text and the books that I've written. And you bring all that information together, and then you just follow the sequence for yourself.
It's a powerful yeah. And like you say, you get your own intuitions, you get your own insights, and you've held space and created space for that magic to occur. It's beautiful. And well, it seems like a great time to share with the viewers about how they can start on that journey, because you are actually, as part of your offer, and this is already, I mean, I've been speaking to Richard about his prices. I mean, his prices are already, in my opinion, very, very low.
Way too low.
Actually, like halving them even further. So, yeah, Richard, do you want to talk about, it's the activation sequence, which is the invitation for the viewers. Can you just share a little bit about?
Yeah, it's the one I mentioned. It's part 1 of this program, and it's that part that just gives you a journey, you know. So you can go onto my website right now, genekeys.com, and you can go through Golden Path, click Golden Path, and in there you'll see step 1. And step 1 has various free materials, like a webinar, you know, a seminar that just, you know, a video that talks you what about the gene, where the gene keys came from, some other, you know, free things that you can read and listen to that kind of talk about what the journey is going to be. And then essentially the whole Golden Path has 33 steps, and each step is like really clearly laid out. You know, it's like, it just says like step 1, you know, there's almost like a checklist. There is a checklist, and it says, have you read this? Have you listened to this? Have you contemplated this? Have you watched this? If you've done that, you've done step 1. Are you ready to move to step 2? And what I'm offering is the golden is sequence 1, which is the first 10 steps. Well, the first step's free anyway, so it's then those other steps that take you down on this journey, kind of beginning into the rabbit hole, so that you can begin to understand and clear the kind of pathways inside your being, so that you're ready to enter into the Venus sequence work, which, as I said, is a much deeper work. So I'm offering that phase, and, you know, for very cheap, I think $32, which is, you know, whatever
Half
it is.
price from
Yeah.
$64.
Yeah.
And I know really it's a discount from $100, because I know that very soon it's going to be $100, isn't it, for people to go to the activation sequence. So $32 is very generous.
Yes.
And I highly recommend it to all of our viewers. I mean, it's changed my life. You know, I know that is sort of that gets thrown around, that statement, but it is genuinely something which has changed my life and continues to do so, because it's really a continuous path. So to access that, all you need to do is click on the link that I am sending you in today's email. And there is a promotional code which we're giving you, which you need to key in at checkout, and it will reduce the price down to $32. So yeah, I highly recommend it. This is very deep, very profound, and very life-changing work, as I said. Richard, before we end today's interview, I would love to finish with asking you another question. It's another deep question, of course. Could go in many different directions, but I'm keen to get your wording, your consciousness about this. So the question is, what is love? in your opinion? And you know, you are a man of very beautiful words as a poet, so I'm just sort of, it's kind of like a bit indulgent, really, me asking this question. But you know, what could you share with the viewers about what you have learnt, you know, true love, sacred love to be?
Yeah, well, it's a lovely question, isn't it? And you know, for me, love is the fabric of the universe. You know, I mean, I know that that's the kind of thing people say, you know, but it's true. You know, it's the fabric that stitches together the cosmos. You know, it's the breath of the divine. It's the emanation of the divine. It is everything. There is nothing that isn't love. You know, even the most difficult shadow or pain or suffering or the most vitriolic behavior has at its core a pure love. And so the whole nature of the universe that we find ourselves in, and these lives that we inhabit on this earth plane, underneath it, at the core, is this love. At the core, it's like Christ said, you know, break open a stick, you know, randomly, and I am in there. You know, everywhere you look in creation, at the core of everything is this light. You know, is this light of consciousness, and it's the light of love. Love is its emanation. So we are all following vectors through time and space, trajectories, which are taking us back to that primary emanation. That's what our lives are. You know, that's what our multiple lives are, moving on these curves through time and space, you know, into one life, out of that life, into another life, into another form. But the same impulse of love is at the core of each lifetime, you know, until we one day reach a lifetime in which there's a zenith, you know, there's a kind of an initiation that then completes this phase of our evolution, you know, as we, and it's always a finale into, you know, an explosion of love, you know, a permanent opening into love, like a permanent opening of the heart, so that the heart finally kind of feels its own essence once again and returns home. And that's sort of, that's what this human story is all about. Each one of us is at a different place in that journey, you know, and that's where it's leading us. It's leading us back to the ocean of love. We're like those, you know, we're like those kind of serpents or those eels or whatever that go up to the source and then they return back to the ocean, you know, and we're doing that same thing. We're giving birth to ourselves and then return to the ocean of being, the ocean of love. And so that sounds very romantic, and it is very romantic. And it also, for me, is the ultimate truth. That's what we're here for. So, you know, love is the whole journey. Yeah.
Well, Richard, I think we all just fell a little bit more in love with you as we listened to that. So thank you. It's yeah, I love the way that you are so divinely designed to put, you know, this poetry, you know, into it's an incredible skill that you have. And I think it opens the heart of many. And also I want to like just recognize, acknowledge and thank you for obviously coming back to the show and, you know, for sharing this beautiful moment with myself and the Summit viewers. And I appreciate that. And it was sort of, it did make me chuckle a little bit because, you know, we're designed differently, and Richard is very much, his mission is about, you know, the physical and bringing the spiritual into the physical and society and everything. And you know, I did sort of chuckle a little bit when Richard sent me a email saying, this is a bit sensitive, but do you mind if I don't use your banner? And I got it, you know, I completely got it. And I think it's beautiful that there are so many different vibrations in the spiritual communities, and, you know, we get to explore and indulge ourselves, sometimes maybe a little bit too much, in these, like, you know, these different wormholes. And I just thank you for being a grounding force in my life, and I thank you for the wisdom that you have taught me, and the, you know, the embodied the embodied transformation that I have really received as being a customer of yours or a fan of yours or whatever we want to call it. You know, it's certainly, your work found me at a time in my life where I was really needing to integrate these heightened experiences into the physical. And it definitely was a key part of my journey. And, you know, I know that is the case for many, many people all over the globe as well. So, you know, I just want to thank you and acknowledge you for the incredible light and teacher that you are in the world.
Thank you. It's very kind of you to say.
So I also want to thank the viewers for tuning in today, and for, you know, receiving this incredible transmission, and for allowing yourselves to open more to love. You know, I think everybody who has been attracted to this summit, every single one of you are very brave, you know, very courageous in your own ways, because, You know, we can talk about lovely sort of esoteric high principles, but when it comes to our relationships, this is the acid test, I think, for us all in terms of our spiritual evolution. So, you know, just by being here and putting your consciousness, your intention out there to be part of this summit, I believe you're already making huge ripples of change in your life and within your relationships, which can only take you to a higher place. So thank you so much to everybody for your presence. Thank you to Richard again for an incredible interview. And I will see you very soon again for another love conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.